Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Beneath the brooding skies of the mortal realm, Sapphire walked alone, a ghost of the being he once was. Centuries ago, he had stood at the zenith of power, a radiant champion of the holy light, his wings bright as the dawn. But that was another life, another time. Now, his once golden wings were tattered, blackened by the corruption that had seeped into his very soul when he turned away from the light. The cold wind bit at his face, carrying with it the stench of decay, a reminder of the chaos he had helped unleash. The darkness in the world echoed the one inside him, feeding off the fear, greed, and hatred he had once propagated in his lust for power. Sapphire's eyes, sharp and wary, scanned the horizon, where the remnants of human villages clung desperately to life, unaware of the catastrophe looming closer. The land had grown sick, the sky perpetually shrouded in thick, swirling clouds. He felt it in the earth beneath his boots as something ancient and malevolent was stirring, ready to swallow everything whole. He had spent decades in self-imposed exile, walking the edges of the world, hiding from the light and the dark, unwilling to face either. He had betrayed them both, betrayed everyone who had ever trusted him. Now, all that remained of the proud angel was a shadow, a being so consumed by his own guilt that he could barely look at his reflection. But the light, a broken bar, it called to him still, faint, distant, but there. A voice like a whisper in the wind, reminding him of who he once was. He had tried to ignore it for so long, but now, as the darkness crept ever closer, its pull grew stronger, demanding that he act before it was too late. Night had fallen by the time Sapphire reached the outskirts of a small village nestled in the valley. Its people were poor, their homes small and unremarkable, but they had managed to carve out a life for themselves despite the harsh world around them. Sapphire watched from the shadows, his presence cloaked by the remnants of his once great magic. He knew they would not welcome him if they saw what he had become. He was about to turn away, retreat into the darkness once more, when he heard Ida scream. Sharp, piercing, filled with terror. His instincts, dulled by centuries of apathy, flared to life. Without thinking, he moved toward the sound, his wings trailing faintly behind him like wisps of smoke. The village square was already a scene of chaos, dark, twisted creatures as shadows given form, products of the creeping darkness that had descended upon the people. They were grotesque mockeries of life, their bodies writhing with dark energy, their eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. For a moment, Sapphire hesitated. These were not his people. This was not his fight. But as another scream pierced the air, something inside him shifted. He could not walk away. Not again. He leapt into the fray, his bladia, an ancient relic of his former life, appearing in his hand with a flash of pale light. The shadows recoiled at its touch, screeching as their dark forms disintegrated. Sapphire moved like lightning, cutting through them with a precision that came from centuries of battle, though his movements lacked the grace they once held. The villagers watched in stunned silence, unsure whether this new figure was friend or foe. Sapphire ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. He was a weapon, forged in both light and darkness, and tonight, he would use that weapon to protect. But the battle was not without cost. One of the creatures, faster than the rest, lunged at him, its claws sinking into his shoulder before he could react. Pain flared through him, but he fought on, dispatching the creature with a final, furious strike. As the last of the shadows faded, Sapphire collapsed to one knee, blood seeping from his wound. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought it might be the end. He would not have minded, he had lived long enough, after all. But fate had other plans. A soft voice, hesitant but clear, broke through the haze of his pain. You saved us." Sapphire looked up, his vision clearing enough to make out the figure of a young woman standing before him. She was small, fragile even, with long brown hair and eyes that shone with a strange mixture of fear and gratitude. "You're hurt," she continued, her brow furrowing with concern as she knelt beside him. "We have a healer. Please, let us help you." Sapphire shook his head, trying to rise to his feet. "I'm fine," he rasped, though the effort sent a wave of dizziness through him. "You don't know what I am." "I know enough," she said firmly. "You saved us. That's what matters." Sapphire's eyes locked with hers, searching for the judgment he had come to expect. But there was Nania's kindness, and something else he had long forgotten. "Hope." "Please," she said again, softer this time, "let us help." For the first time in centuries, Sapphire allowed himself to be led. Sapphire awoke in a small, dimly lit room, the scent of herbs and firewood filling the air. His shoulder throbbed, but the pain had lessened, thanks to the bandages that now covered his wound. He had been asleep for longer than he had intended, and as he sat up, he realized he was not alone. The young woman from the night before sat across from him, watching him with quiet curiosity. Beside her was Amana, tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly not a fan of their guest. "You're awake?" the woman said, her voice warm but cautious. Sapphire nodded. "Thank you for the care." The man scowled. "We should have left you to die." "Do you even know what he is, Alara?" "Enough, Karin," Alara replied, her tone brooking no argument. "He saved us. We owe him our thanks, whatever he is." Sapphire remained silent, though he could feel Karin's eyes burning into him. He had encountered men like Karin before, proud, protective, and deeply suspicious of anything they didn't understand. Alara, however, seemed different. There was something in her gaze that unsettled him. Not fear or anger, but a quiet understanding. "You're an angel," she said after a moment, her voice steady. Sapphire blinked, surprised by her bluntness. "I was," he admitted. "Once." "And now?" Alara asked, her eyes never leaving his face. Sapphire's lips tightened into a grim line. "Now, I'm nothing. A ghost. A traitor." "You don't seem like nothing to me," she said quietly. "You saved us." "That's not the action of someone who's given up." Karin snorted, crossing his arms. "He's dangerous, Alara. We can't trust him." Sapphire couldn't argue with that. He had spent centuries spreading destruction, wielding the darkness like a weapon. Trust was not something he expected or deserved. But Alara remained undeterred. "I believe there's more to you than what you've shown," she said, her gaze piercing in its sincerity. "I think you came to our village for a reason." Sapphire's jaw clenched. He didn't want to admit that she was right, didn't want to acknowledge the pull of the holy light that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "You don't know anything about me," he muttered, his voice rough with self-loathing. "I've done things, horrible things. Things that can't be forgiven." Alara's expression softened. "I've seen enough darkness in this world to know that it doesn't define you unless you let it." Her words cut through him like a blade, striking at the heart of the shame and guilt he had carried for so long. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was still a chance for redemption, but the darkness inside him whispered otherwise. Before he could respond, the ground trembled beneath them, a low, ominous rumble that sent a chill down Sapphire's spine. He recognized it instantly as the darkness was coming, faster than he had anticipated. Alara's face paled as she stood, her eyes wide with fear. What is that?" Sapphire rose to his feet, his wings twitching in agitation. "The end," he said grimly. "It's coming." As the darkness spread across the land like a creeping plague, Sapphire and Alara stood on the outskirts of the village, watching as the horizon was swallowed by a thick, inky cloud. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, and the distant wails of despair echoed through the valley. "You have to leave," Sapphire said, his voice urgent. "Take your people and run. This place won't survive what's coming." Alara shook her head, her face set with determination. "We can't just abandon our home." Sapphire's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. This isn't something you can fight. It will destroy everything in its path, and no one will be spared." "Then why are you still here?" Alara asked, her tone challenging. "If you believe it's hopeless, why haven't you left?" For a moment, Sapphire had no answer. He could have left. He should have left. But something, whether it was the faint pull of the holy light or the guilt that weighed Havion his Soula kept him tethered to this place. I have nowhere else to go, he admitted finally. Alara's gaze softened as Sapphire's words hung in the cold air. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant rumble of the approaching darkness. Sapphire shifted his weight, uneasy beneath her unyielding eyes, yet unwilling to turn away. You do have somewhere to go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet firm. You have the holy light. You have the power to stop this. Sapphire's wings twitched. The mere mention of the holy light sent a familiar ache through him, a longing so deep it was almost painful. He clenched his fists, staring out at the horizon where the darkness was growing, swallowing everything in its path. That power. It's not mine anymore. It hasn't been for a long time, he said, his voice low and tight. I don't deserve it. Alar stepped closer, her presence a strange warmth in the cold night. Deserving doesn't matter, she said. The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to act. Now, Sapphire's gaze flickered to her. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that the light would still accept him after everything he had done. But the weight of his sins bore down on him like a heavy chain, each link forged by his own hand. The rumble of the dark cloud grew louder, more ominous, a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers. Alara laid a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Please, she said, her voice breaking slightly. If there's even a chance that you can stop this, you have to try. Sapphire swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. He had run from the light for so long, convinced that he was beyond redemption, beyond salvation. But as he stood here, looking into the eyes of a woman who still believed in him, a tiny spark ignited deep within his chest. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time in centuries, Sapphire dared to hope. With a deep breath, Sapphire straightened his shoulders, the heavy weight of his wings shifting behind him. He looked to Alara, his face set with determination. If I do this, he said, his voice rough but resolute, you have to promise me something. Alara nodded, her expression earnest. Anything. If I fail, he continued, you take your people and run. You don't look back. Alara's eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, a silent agreement hanging between them. Sapphire turned his gaze to the horizon, where the darkness was now looming like a tidal wave ready to crash. He reached deep inside himself, searching for the light he had buried so long ago. It was weak, barely more than a flicker, but it was there, deep beneath the layers of guilt, anger, and regret. With a grunt of effort, Sapphire called upon the last remnants of his power. His wings unfurled fully behind him, catching the faint glimmer of light that still remained in the world. The ground trembled beneath him as the air around him shimmered with the soft glow of the holy light. For a moment, Sapphire felt the connection he had thought lost forever. It wasn't the overwhelming flood of power he once commanded, but it was enough. It had to be. He stepped forward, his wings beating against the cold night air, pushing him up into the sky. Below, Alara watched, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. As Sapphire soared higher, the darkness surged forward, as if sensing the challenge in his movements. The sky above him roiled with thick, black clouds, tendrils of shadow reaching out to snuff out the small light he carried. But Sapphire pushed on, his mind focused on the task ahead. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on him, trying to crush him, but he refused to yield. Not this time. The first wave of shadow creatures descended upon him, their twisted forms shrieking in rage as they attacked. Sapphire's blade flashed, cutting through them with precision, though each strike left him feeling weaker, more drained. The darkness was unlike anything he had faced before, relentless, merciless. But Sapphire had faced worse. He had been worse. He fought on, each strike fueled by the tiny spark of light that burned brighter with every moment. He could feel the darkness pushing back, but he could also feel something else, the holy light, growing stronger inside him with every shadow he defeated. And then, as he slashed through another wave of creatures, he saw a figure in the center of the darkness, watching him. Tall, cloaked in shadow, its eyes burned with a malevolent red glow. This was no mere creature. This was the source. Sapphire's breath caught in his throat. He had known the darkness was powerful, but this was something else entirely. It radiated evil, a presence so strong it nearly suffocated him. But Sapphire wasn't afraid, not anymore. He flew toward the figure, his wings beating harder, faster. As the distance between them closed, the figure raised a hand, and a wall of shadow surged up to meet him, but Sapphire was ready. With a fierce cry, he brought his blade down, cutting through the darkness in a blaze of light. The figure recoiled, hissing in fury as the light struck it. For a brief moment, the darkness faltered, and Sapphire seized the opportunity. He surged forward, plunging his blade toward the heart of the shadow. But the figure was quick, twisting out of the way at the last second. Its laughter echoed through the air, cold and mocking. "You cannot stop me, fallen one," the figure hissed, its voice a rasping whisper. "You are too late. The darkness will consume all." Sapphire's jaw clenched. "Maybe," he said, his voice hard. "But I'll take you down with me." With a roar, Sapphire lunged again, his blade flashing with the light of the holy. The figure shrieked, recoiling once more as the light struck it, but this time, Sapphire didn't relent. He pressed forward, driving the darkness back with every strike. But the battle was taking its toll. Every swing of his blade left him weaker, every burst of light drained him further. The darkness was relentless, pushing back harder with every moment. And yet, Sapphire refused to give in. He had come too far, fought too long, to give up now. The light within him flared brighter, fueled by a determination he hadn't felt in centuries. He could do this. He would do this. With one final, desperate cry, Sapphire raised his blade high, summoning every last ounce of light within him. The air around him crackled with energy, the ground trembling beneath the sheer force of his power. And then, with a blinding flash, he brought the blade down. The explosion of light was deafening, consuming everything in its path. The darkness shrieked in agony as it was torn apart, the figure at its center disintegrating in the brilliance of the holy light. For a moment, there was nothing but blinding light, so bright it seared the sky itself. And then, silence. When the light finally faded, Sapphire stood alone in the center of the battlefield, his wings heavy with exhaustion, his breath ragged. The darkness was gone, reduced to nothing but wisps of shadow that drifted on the wind. But Sapphire knew the cost. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. The battle had drained him, the light within him flickering on the edge of extinguishment. But it had been enough. He had done what he needed to do. As he sank to his knees, the weight of his exhaustion pressing down on him, he looked up at the sky. The stars, once obscured by the darkness, now shone brightly above him, their light a reminder of the world he had fought to save. He had done it. He had redeemed himself, if only in this one act. And it was enough. In the distance, he heard footsteps at Alara, running toward him. Her voice called out to him, filled with relief and concern, but Sapphire couldn't find the strength to respond. The world around him grew hazy, his vision blurring as the last of his strength left him. But even as the darkness closed in, Sapphire felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.